The great chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive structure that held the fate of 200 species within its curved walls. Ambassador Dae-hyun stood at the human podium, his hand steady despite the weight of what was coming. He had served the Galactic Council for 23 years, and in all that time, he had never seen the chamber this quiet. The silence felt wrong, like the air before a storm. Around him, the other species sat in their designated sections. Some breathed oxygen like humans did. Others floated in tanks of liquid methane or rested in chambers filled with gases that would kill a human in seconds. The Galactic Council was proud of its diversity, proud of how it brought together so many different forms of life. Dae-hyun had believed in that pride once. He had believed the Council stood for something greater than any single species. That belief died 3 months ago when he discovered the truth. Arbiter Thelnax rose from his seat at the center of the chamber. His forearms spread wide in a gesture that looked welcoming but felt like a threat. His reptilian face showed no emotion, but Dae-hyun had learned to read the small signs. The way Thelnax's inner eyelids flickered, the slight tightening of his jaw. The Arbiter was nervous, though he hid it well. "We gathered today to address a serious violation of Council law," Thelnax announced. His voice echoed through the chamber, translated instantly into 200 different languages by the systems humans had built and maintained for the past 50 years. Humanity has broken the Treaty of Expansion. They have established colonies in protected sectors. This cannot stand. Dae-hyun did not react. Behind him, his aide Hana shifted slightly, her young face tight with anger. She wanted him to fight, to shout, to show the Council their accusations were lies. But Dae-hyun had been doing this too long. He knew when a decision had already been made. The evidence appeared on the holographic displays that filled the chamber. 17 human colony worlds, their locations marked in red. The displays showed dates, population numbers, and resource extraction data. It all looked damning. It all looked like humanity had broken its word. What the displays did not show were the messages Dae-hyun had found buried in the Council's own archives. Secret agreements between Thelnax and the Vryn Consortium, promises that certain sectors would be kept empty, saved for Vryn expansion, economic deals that traded away the rights of smaller species for profit. The Council had not protected those sectors for environmental reasons or to preserve primitive cultures. They had kept them empty so the Vryn could claim them later. Humanity had not known about these secret deals. The public maps showed those sectors as open for colonization, so humans had gone there, built homes, raised children, and created new worlds from barren rock and ice. 30 million people now called those 17 worlds home. Dae-hyun had presented his evidence to the Council 2 weeks ago. He had shown them their own messages, their own corrupt bargains. He had asked for an investigation. The Council had refused. They buried his evidence and accelerated their judgment against humanity. "Ambassador Dae-hyun," Thelnax said, his voice carrying false sympathy. "Do you have anything to say before we render our decision?" Dae-hyun looked around the chamber. He saw species that humanity had helped during the Ravager Wars, when mechanical horrors had swept through this part of the galaxy. Human ships had held the line while others evacuated. Human soldiers had died buying time for alien civilians to escape. He saw species whose medical problems humans had solved, whose trade routes humans had protected, whose languages humans had learned and preserved. Not one of them met his eyes. He understood then. This was not about law or justice. This was about power and money. The Vryn Consortium had made promises, offered deals too good to refuse, and the Council had decided that 30 million humans were an acceptable price to pay. "We followed the law as it was presented to us," Dae-hyun said quietly. His voice was calm, but it carried to every corner of the chamber. "We settled in sectors marked as open. We broke no treaty, but I see that facts do not matter here today." Thelnax's scales rippled with irritation. "You will not—" "I am not finished," Dae-hyun interrupted. Something in his tone made the Arbiter stop. "I have served this Council for more than 2 decades. I believed in what we were building together. I believed the Council stood for cooperation, for fairness, for the good of all species. I was wrong." The chamber erupted in noise. Some species shouted in anger. Others called for order. A very few, remained silent and watched Dae-hyun with something like shame in their eyes. Thelnax slammed his primary hand against his desk. "Order, Ambassador, you will show respect or you will be removed." Dae-hyun smiled then, and it was not a kind smile. The Council will now pass its judgment. Humanity will be ordered to abandon our 17 colony worlds. We will have 6 months to evacuate 30 million people. If we refuse, the Council will authorize military action. Is that correct? Thelnax's hesitation confirmed it. The Council must protect the integrity of the treaty. The evacuation period will be generous. 6 months should be sufficient. I see. Daehyun gathered his papers with careful, precise movements. Hana stood beside him, her hands shaking with rage, but she stayed quiet. Then let me save the Council some time. Humanity will comply with your decision. The silence that followed was absolute. Species who had been shouting moments before went quiet. Thelnax's 4 eyes widened in surprise. This was not the response anyone had expected. You accept the judgment? Thelnax asked carefully. We will evacuate the 17 worlds as ordered, Daehyun confirmed. We will remove our people within 6 months. We will comply with every aspect of the Council's decree. He paused, then added softly, we will remember that the Council asked this of us. We will remember who stood with us and who remained silent. He turned to leave, Hana following close behind. As they walked toward the exit, Daehyun heard whispers starting to spread through the chamber. Some sounded relieved, others sounded uncertain. A few sounded afraid, though he could not imagine why. Humanity was accepting defeat. What was there to fear? At the door, Daehyun stopped and looked back one final time. He saw Thelnax watching him with an expression the human could not quite read. Triumph, suspicion, perhaps both. One more thing, Daehyun said into the silence. After the evacuation is complete, humanity will be withdrawing from all Council activities. We will close our diplomatic missions. We will terminate our trade agreements. We will recall our citizens from Council space. We entered this alliance freely, and we will leave it the same way. You cannot, Thelnax started. We can, Daehyun said simply. And we will. Goodbye, Arbiter. I hope the Council's new friends are worth what you have lost today. He walked out of the chamber and did not look back. Behind him, the real chaos was just beginning. But Daehyun did not care anymore. He had a job to do. 30 million people needed to come home, and he was going to make sure every single one of them made it safely. The Council had made its choice. Now humanity would make theirs. Governor Jiwoo stood on the observation deck of New Jeju's main settlement and watched the ships descend from orbit. They came in organized waves, massive colony transports that could carry thousands of people each. The sky was full of them, their engines burning bright against the morning stars. It should have been beautiful. Instead, it broke her heart. She had spent 18 years building this world. When she first arrived, New Jeju was nothing but rock and ice, a frozen moon orbiting a gas giant. The atmosphere had been toxic. The temperature never rose above freezing. There was no water, no soil, no life of any kind. Now Jiwoo could see green fields stretching to the horizon, forests of earth trees mixed with hardy alien plants that humans had learned to cultivate. Rivers flowed where engineers had melted the ice and created a water cycle. The air was breathable. Children played in parks. People lived in real houses, not prefab shelters. They had made this place home, and now they had 6 months to abandon it all. Governor, the first transport is ready to begin loading, her assistant said quietly. The young man's eyes were red from crying, but his voice stayed steady. Everyone was trying to stay professional, to keep things organized. It was the only way to get through this. Tell them to proceed, Jiwoo said. Start with the eastern settlements. Follow the plan exactly. The plan. Chief Engineer Hyun-soo had worked for 3 weeks straight to create it. Jiwoo had watched him grow thinner, more exhausted as he calculated every detail of the largest evacuation in human history. 30 million people across 17 worlds all leaving within 6 months. It should have been impossible, but humans were good at doing impossible things. The evacuation of New Jeju began at dawn and continued without stopping. Families gathered at designated zones with the belongings they were allowed to bring. The weight limits were strict. Everyone understood why. The ships could only carry so much. What surprised the Council observers was what else the humans were taking. Transport ships did not just load people. They loaded equipment. Medical facilities were carefully dismantled. Every piece of advanced technology packed into cargo containers. The fusion reactors that powered the settlements were shut down and removed. Agricultural machines, water purification systems, computer networks, everything of value was systematically stripped away. Is this necessary? One of the observers asked Jiwoo. He was from a species that looked like a walking tree, his bark-like skin rough with age. The council said you must evacuate the people. The infrastructure could remain for the next inhabitants. Jiwoo looked at him with cold eyes. We built this infrastructure. We paid for it with our time, our resources, and our sweat. The council ordered us to leave. They said nothing about leaving gifts behind. The observer seemed uncomfortable but said nothing more. He filed his report and watched as the humans continued their methodical dismantling of everything they had created. In the medical center, Dr. Youngmi supervised the removal of equipment that had taken a decade to build. The center had been her pride, a facility that could handle everything from simple injuries to complex alien biologies. Human doctors did not just treat humans. They had learned to help dozens of species, had developed new techniques and medicines that benefited the entire galactic community. All of that knowledge was now being packed into data cores and loaded onto the transports. Doctor, we can't take the gene sequencer, one of her staff said sadly. It's too big and we're out of cargo space. Youngmi looked at the machine. It had cost millions of credits. It had helped cure 3 different alien plagues. Leaving it behind felt like abandoning a piece of her soul. Wipe its memory, she said finally. Remove the core processors. If we can't take it, we'll make sure it can't be used without us. Her staff nodded and got to work. Across the colony, similar decisions were being made. Anything too large to transport was rendered inert. Computer systems had their advanced programming deleted. Manufacturing equipment had key components removed. The settlements would remain standing, but they would be hollow shells, empty of the life and knowledge that had made them valuable. Commander Taewan's fleet maintained a perimeter around the 17 worlds, ensuring the evacuation proceeded safely. His ships were ready for trouble, but none came. The Council had gotten what it wanted. They saw no reason to interfere with humanity's departure. What they failed to notice was the other departures happening simultaneously. Human trade ships throughout Council space were quietly returning home. They did not make announcements. They did not file protests. They simply completed their current contracts and then left, their cargo holds empty. Human merchants closed their businesses. Human teachers finished their classes and resigned. Human engineers completed their maintenance schedules one final time and then departed. The Great Human Information Network, which had connected thousands of worlds and billions of beings, began shutting down node by node. The shutdown was orderly, professional. Each network hub was carefully deactivated, its data backed up and removed. The humans who had maintained these systems for decades logged out for the last time and headed home. No one noticed at first. The galaxy was large and individual departures meant nothing, but altogether, it was like watching blood drain from a body, slow and steady and irreversible. Back on New Jeju, the evacuation entered its 4th month. The settlements were ghostly now. Half-empty buildings where voices once echoed with life. Jiwoo walked through the streets she had planned, past the parks she had designed, under the trees she had planted with her own hands. At the town center, someone had erected a memorial. It was simple, just a stone pillar with words carved into it. We were here. We built this. We loved it. What remains is only stone. Jiwoo touched the cold rock and felt tears on her face for the first time since the evacuation began. She had stayed strong for her people, had kept her grief private. But here, alone in the empty square, she allowed herself to mourn. Governor, it's time, Hyun-soo said gently. He had appeared beside her, looking as exhausted as she felt. The last transport is ready. Everyone else is already aboard. I know, Jiwoo said. She took one last look around, memorizing every detail. Have the orbital stations been cleared? Everything's been removed or deactivated, Hyun-soo confirmed. The agricultural satellites, the weather control network, the defense platforms, all either transported away or rendered non-functional. When we leave, this world will slowly return to what it was before we came. Jiwoo nodded. That felt right somehow. If they could not keep their home, then no one else should have it either. Let it return to ice and silence. On the transport, she found a window seat and watched as New Jeju shrank below them. From orbit, she could see the empty settlements, the dark power stations, the agricultural fields that would soon wither without maintenance. In a year, maybe less, the cold would reclaim everything. The ice would return. The forest would die. It would be as if humans had never been there at all. Except they had been there, and they remembered. Across the 17 worlds, the same scene repeated. The last humans departed, taking with them everything of value, leaving behind only empty buildings and silent streets. Council observers filed reports noting the efficiency of the evacuation, the lack of resistance, the complete compliance with the Council's orders. What they described as compliance, the humans knew as something else entirely. It was the careful, deliberate removal of every contribution they had made to the galactic community. It was the patient dismantling of relationships built over 3 centuries. It was the quiet severing of 10,000 connections that had bound humanity to the Council, and it was only the beginning. Young Mi recorded a final message before her ship jumped to faster-than-light speed. She sat in her cabin looking tired but composed and spoke to the camera. To anyone who finds this, know that we did not leave in anger or hate. We left in sorrow. We built beautiful things here. We made friends. We thought we were building a future together. But the Council taught us that we were wrong to trust, wrong to invest our hearts in places we could not truly call our own. So we're taking those hearts home. What we leave behind is just the empty shell. Goodbye. The message was never sent to the Council. It was archived in human databases, a record for future generations, a reminder of what had been lost and why. The first sign of trouble came from the medical stations. Councillor Ventari received the emergency transmission while reviewing trade reports in her chambers. She was a member of the Arachnus species, her 8 legs supporting a body covered in fine sensory hairs that could detect the slightest vibrations. Those hairs were trembling now as she read the message from the hospital on her homeworld. Critical shortage of Compound 7. Request immediate resupply. Current stocks will last 3 days maximum. Without it, we cannot treat the genetic disorder that affects 60% of our population. Ventari's primary eyes widened in alarm. Compound 7 was a complex pharmaceutical that required precise manufacturing. Only one species in the galaxy had the technology to produce it efficiently. Humans. She sent urgent messages to the human pharmaceutical companies that had supplied her people for 70 years. The responses came back within hours, all identical in their polite brevity. We regret to inform you that we are ceasing all operations in Council space as of today. All existing contracts are hereby terminated. We wish you well in your future endeavors. Ventari's legs buckled slightly. 70 years. Humans had been saving her people for 70 years, and she had sat silent in the Council chamber while they were condemned. She had told herself it was not her concern, that the Council's business with humanity did not involve her species. She had been wrong. The medical crisis was only the beginning. Within weeks, the effects of humanity's departure rippled across the entire galactic community, like cracks spreading through ice. Trade routes that had functioned smoothly for generations suddenly collapsed. Humans had operated the logistics networks that coordinated shipping between different sectors. They had maintained the databases that tracked cargo, calculated routes, and managed customs between species with wildly different trade laws. Without human oversight, the system fragmented into chaos. Ships arrived at stations only to find no one who could process their cargo. Merchants discovered that their contracts were written in formats that only human translators could properly interpret. Entire trade agreements fell apart because the humans who had mediated between species with incompatible communication methods were gone. On the station orbiting Praxis Major, fights broke out between traders who could no longer understand each other's intentions. The universal translation protocols had not been updated in 3 months. Subtle meanings were lost. Insults were accidentally given. Trade negotiations that should have been simple turned into dangerous confrontations. The station administrator sent desperate messages to the human embassy, only to receive an automated response. The human diplomatic mission to Praxis Major has closed. For historical records, please contact the archives on Earth. But the deepest cuts came from the places where humans had been so common that no one noticed them anymore. The schools where human teachers had educated alien children. The hospitals where human doctors had learned to treat species with biologies completely unlike their own. The research stations where human scientists had collaborated with alien minds to solve problems neither could tackle alone. All empty now. All silent. Arbiter Thelnak stood in the council chamber and tried to maintain order, but his authority was crumbling. Species that had once respected his decisions now shouted accusations across the floor. You said removing the humans would strengthen the council. roared a delegate whose species breathed methane. "Instead, our medical facilities are failing. Our people are dying because we no longer have access to human pharmaceutical technology. The humans were extracting resources from protected sectors," Thelnax insisted, his forearms spread in a placating gesture. "We had to enforce the treaty." "The treaty you secretly violated with your deals with the Vryn Consortium?" Someone shouted back. "Yes, we know about those now. The humans were right, and we condemned them anyway." Thelnax felt his scales ripple with barely controlled anger. The accusations were becoming harder to deny. Evidence of his dealings had somehow leaked to the Council. He suspected human intelligence services, but he could not prove it, and it did not matter anyway. The damage was done. The Vryn Consortium, emboldened by their apparent victory, moved quickly to claim the abandoned human colonies. Their ships arrived at the First World with great fanfare, ready to establish their presence in the sectors they had purchased with backdoor deals and political favors. What they found shocked them. The colony of New Jeju sat empty and dark. The buildings stood intact, but when the Vryn tried to activate the power systems, nothing worked. The fusion reactors had been removed. The backup generators were missing key components. The entire settlement was a shell, useless without the technology that had made it function. "Where are the agricultural systems?" the Vryn commander demanded. The report said this world produced enough food to feed 3 planets. "The equipment is gone," his subordinate reported. "The fields remain, but without the automated irrigation, the climate control network, and the genetic seed banks, they're worthless. In a few months, the local weather patterns will destabilize without the satellites. This world will return to what it was before the humans arrived." The commander felt a chill run through his exoskeleton. "Check the other colonies immediately." The reports came back over the following weeks. Every human colony was the same. Empty buildings, stripped infrastructure. Nothing of value remained. Even worse, 3 of the colonies were now unreachable. The humans had shut down the jump gates that connected those systems to the rest of the galaxy. Without the gates, traveling to those worlds would take decades using conventional faster-than-light drives. The Vryn had purchased 17 worthless rocks floating in space. Back on her homeworld, Ventari watched her people suffer and felt shame burn through her like acid. The hospitals were overwhelmed. People with treatable conditions were dying because the medicines had run out. Doctors were trying to create alternative treatments, but they lacked the knowledge. Humans had spent decades learning arachnous biology, had developed specialized techniques and medications specifically for her species. That knowledge had left with them. She tried to contact Subin, a human trade liaison she had worked with for years. Subin had always been professional, efficient, and genuinely seemed to care about helping the Arachnus people. Surely she would understand, would help arrange some kind of emergency supply. The response came back terse and cold. "All human economic agreements with council species have been terminated. All licenses for human technology have been revoked. We have nothing further to discuss. Please," Ventari sent back, her pride crumbling. "My people are dying. Children are suffering. We need your help." Subin's final response arrived hours later, and its brevity was more cutting than any angry tirade could have been. "Where were you when we needed yours?" The message ended there. Subin never replied again. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. Species that had relied on human contributions scrambled to fill the gaps and failed. Engineers could not replicate the elegant solutions humans had developed. Doctors could not recreate the treatments humans had perfected over decades of research. Diplomats could not mediate conflicts the way humans had. With their strange ability to understand and empathize with utterly alien mindsets, the Council had not realized how deeply humanity had woven itself into the fabric of galactic civilization. They had been so common, so helpful, so present everywhere that they became invisible. Like oxygen, you never noticed it until it was gone. Now it was gone, and the Council was suffocating. 3 months after the evacuation, Captain Jae Sung commanded the last human vessel in Council space. His ship was a small diplomatic courier, fast and well-armed. He had volunteered for this final mission, to officially close the last human embassy and carry home the final staff members. As his ship prepared to leave Council space, he received one last transmission from Arbiter Thelnax himself. "Captain, I request a meeting. There are matters we must discuss. The Council wishes to negotiate a return to normal relations. Jae-sung looked at the message for a long moment. He thought about the 30 million people who had been forced from their homes. He thought about the 3 centuries of cooperation that the council had thrown away for political convenience. He thought about his daughter, who had been born on one of those colonies and had cried for weeks after leaving the only home she had ever known. His response was brief. Humanity complied with the council's decree. We left the colonies. We have fulfilled our obligations. We wish the council well in their future endeavors. But surely, Thelnax began. We have nothing further to discuss, Jae-sung said, and closed the channel. His ship jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving council space behind. As the stars stretched into lines around him, Jae-sung allowed himself a small smile. Behind him, the council was learning a lesson that humanity had paid dearly to teach. When you build a house, every beam matters. Every nail matters. You do not notice their importance until you start removing them. Then suddenly, the whole structure comes crashing down. Humanity had been the beams and nails holding the council together. Now they were gone and the house was falling apart, and the humans, they were already building something new. Somewhere the council could not reach them. Somewhere they would never be vulnerable to betrayal again. The council war began on a Tuesday, though few would remember that detail later. What they would remember was the sound of alarms screaming across 36 worlds simultaneously, as Vryn warships crossed borders that had been peaceful for a century. The Vryn consortium had grown bold. They had gotten their sectors, even if those sectors proved worthless. Now they wanted more. With humanity gone and the council fractured, there was no one to stop them. Councillor Ventari watched the reports flood in from her private chambers. The Vryn had attacked the Pelian homeworld, claiming an old territorial dispute gave them rights to the system. The Pelians were a peaceful species, their military small and outdated. They had relied on council protection and human-mediated diplomacy to keep them safe. Both were gone now. We must authorize a defense force, Ventari said in the emergency council session. Her voice was steady, but her legs trembled with fury and fear. The Vryn are violating every treaty we have. If we do nothing, they will not stop with the Pelians. Arbiter Thelnax sat in his seat and said nothing. His forearms were folded across his chest, his reptilian eyes distant. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. The confidence that had once radiated from him had evaporated like water in vacuum. The Council's defense fleet requires human coordination systems, someone pointed out. Our ships cannot effectively communicate with each other without the translation protocols and tactical networks the humans maintained. We would be sending them to slaughter. Then we modify our systems, Ventari snapped. We adapt. We learn to do what the humans did for us. That will take years, another counselor said quietly. The Pelians do not have years. They have days, perhaps hours. The chamber fell silent. They all knew what that meant. The Pelians would fall, and the council would watch it happen, powerless to intervene. Ventari felt something break inside her. She had built her career on the belief that the council represented the best of galactic civilization. That together they were stronger than any could be alone. That cooperation and law were superior to violence and chaos. But cooperation required trust. And trust once broken was nearly impossible to rebuild. I move for a vote of no confidence in Arbiter Thelnax, Ventari said. Her voice echoed in the shocked silence that followed. His secret dealings with the Vryn have led us to this disaster. His persecution of humanity has cost us our most valuable allies. He is unfit to lead this council. Thelnax's head snapped up, his eyes blazing. You dare— I dare because I must, Ventari interrupted. My people are dying because we lost access to human medicine. The Pelians are dying because we lost human military coordination. The entire council is collapsing because we drove away the one species that held us together. And you, Arbiter, are responsible. The vote was called. Of the 200 species represented in the council, 43 voted to remove Thelnax from his position. 57 voted to keep him. The rest abstained, too afraid or too compromised to take a stand. Thelnax remained in power, but his authority was shattered. The vote revealed what everyone already knew. The council was broken, perhaps beyond repair. 3 days later, the Pelian homeworld fell. Vryn forces occupied the planet and installed a puppet government. Refugees fled to neighboring systems, overwhelming stations that were already struggling without human aid. The council issued a strongly worded condemnation. The Vryn ignored it. Other species began to draw their own conclusions. If the Council could not protect the Pelians, could it protect anyone? Old grievances resurfaced. Border disputes that had been dormant for decades suddenly flared into violence. Species that had lived peacefully beside each other for generations began to eye each other with suspicion. The Council's economy, already damaged by the loss of human trade networks, contracted further. Without confidence in Council protection, species stopped investing in joint projects. They hoarded resources. They built up their own military forces. They prepared for a future where they could only trust themselves. And through it all, the human border remained closed. Commander Minho stood on the bridge of his patrol ship and watched the Council space on his sensors. Every day, ships approached the human border. Some were refugees seeking sanctuary. Others were diplomats with offers and proposals. A few were military vessels testing human defenses. All were turned away. "Sir, we have another diplomatic ship requesting permission to enter human space," his communications officer reported. "They say they have an urgent message from the Council." "Standard response," Minho said. "Humanity has no diplomatic relations with the Council. They should direct their concerns to the archives on Earth for historical purposes." The officer hesitated. "Sir, they're saying people are dying. They're asking for humanitarian aid." Minho felt a weight settle on his chest. He was not a cruel man. The idea of people suffering bothered him. But he had his orders, and more than that, he understood why those orders existed. Tell them that humanitarian concerns should be directed to the Council, which is responsible for the welfare of its member species. He said quietly, "We are not members of the Council. We have no obligations to them." The diplomatic ship lingered at the border for 3 hours before finally turning away. Minho watched it go and felt nothing but a deep, tired sadness. This was not what he had wanted. But the Council had made its choice, and now everyone had to live with the consequences. Behind the border in human space, a different story was unfolding. The refugees from the 17 colonies had been absorbed into existing human worlds or settled on new ones. The loss of the colonies had hurt, but humanity was resilient. They had survived worse, and they were building something new. Intelligence reports reached the Council in fragments, incomplete pictures of what humanity was doing beyond their closed borders. The humans had pushed further out into the galaxy, into regions considered too dangerous or too remote for colonization. They had made contact with species that had never joined the Council, small civilizations that existed at the margins of known space. Most disturbingly, they were advancing their technology at an unprecedented rate, without the need to maintain compatibility with Council systems. Without the political constraints that had limited their research, human scientists were making breakthroughs that should have taken decades. Thelnax read these reports with growing unease. He had expected humanity to collapse without the Council. Instead, they were thriving. In a moment of desperation, he sent a message directly to the human government. Not a request, a demand. "Humanity has obligations to the galactic community," the message read. "You cannot simply abandon the species that depend on your aid. We demand that you return to the Council and fulfill your responsibilities." The response came from Hana, who now served in the Human Diplomatic Corps. Her message was brief and precisely worded. Humanity's only obligation was to evacuate the 17 colonies. We did so. The Council voted to exclude us from its deliberations and protection. We accepted that decision. We have no further obligations to the Council or its members. You would let innocent beings suffer for the Council's mistakes? Thelnax sent back, his message thick with desperation. Hana's response took longer this time, and when it came, it cut deeper than any insult could have. We offered friendship. We offered cooperation. We offered our knowledge, our labor, and our lives in service of the galactic community. The Council rejected all of it for political convenience. Now you ask us to give more? No, Arbiter. We gave enough. It is time for the Council to solve its own problems. Thelnax stared at the message for a long time. He wanted to be angry, to rage at human selfishness, but he could not. Because he knew deep in his heart that they were right. The Council had taken humanity's contributions for granted. They had assumed humans would always be there, always willing to help no matter how they were treated. They had been wrong. Meanwhile, the Council war spread. The Vryn advanced on 2 more systems. Other species, seeing weakness, pressed their own territorial claims. The Council's peacekeeping forces, undermanned and poorly coordinated, struggled to respond. Ventari watched her civilization crumble and knew there was only one option left. It was a terrible option, one that would require her to swallow her pride and admit just how completely the Council had failed. But sometimes, terrible options were the only ones available. She began to draft a message to humanity, not a demand, not an expectation, a plea. The Council had condemned humanity unjustly. They had driven away their most important allies. They had broken faith with a species that had only ever tried to help. Now, with everything falling apart, she would ask them to be better than the Council had been. To help not because they owed anything, but because it was the right thing to do. She did not know if they would listen. After everything the Council had done, she would not blame them if they refused. But she had to try. Because if she did not, the blood of billions would be on her hands. And on the hands of everyone who had sat silent in that chamber while humanity was condemned. The message sent, Ventari sat in the darkness of her chamber and waited for a response that might never come. The garden on Haven was unlike anything that existed in the old Council space. Plants from a dozen different worlds grew together in carefully managed harmony. Earth roses climbed trellises next to flowering vines from a planet whose species had left the Council before the war. Vegetables from the evacuated colonies flourished in rich soil, their seeds saved and replanted in this new home. Daehyun walked the garden paths slowly, his body feeling the weight of his years. 5 years had passed since he stood in the Council chamber and accepted their judgment. 5 years since humanity had walked away from 3 centuries of cooperation and friendship. Sometimes he wondered if they had done the right thing. Then he looked around at what humanity had built in those 5 years, and his doubts faded. Haven was one of 17 new worlds, one for each colony they had lost. But these worlds were different. They belonged to humanity, and to the species who had chosen to leave the Council and join the new alliance. No treaties limited where they could settle. No secret deals undermined their rights. No arbiter could take these homes away. Ambassador Daehyun, a voice pulled him from his thoughts. There is someone here to see you. Daehyun turned to see his old aide Hana standing at the garden entrance. She was no longer young, though not yet old. The years had given her face character, carved lines of experience around her eyes. She had risen high in the diplomatic service of humanity's new coalition, but she still made time to visit him. Who is it? Daehyun asked, though something in Hana's expression told him he would not like the answer. A Council representative, a young one from a species I do not recognize. He says his name is Venris and that he carries a message from Councillor Ventari. Daehyun was quiet for a moment. He had not heard that name in years, though he knew Ventari had survived the chaos that consumed the Council. She had been one of the few who tried to stand against Thelnax, though her courage had come too late to matter. I will see him, Daehyun said finally, but not in an official capacity. I'm retired, Hana. I have no authority to speak for humanity. I know, Hana said gently, but he asked for you specifically, and I think you should hear what he has to say. The young counselor was waiting in the visiting center, a simple building designed to accommodate a variety of biologies. Fenris was tall and thin, his skin a pale blue that reminded Daehyun of ice. He wore formal robes, but they were travel-worn and dirty. He had the look of someone who had come a long way and was very, very tired. Ambassador Daehyun, Fenris said, his voice surprisingly deep for his slender frame. Thank you for agreeing to see me. I am not an ambassador anymore, Daehyun corrected gently. Just an old man who spends his days gardening. But you are welcome here, counselor. Please sit. Tell me why you have come so far. Fenris sat, and for a long moment he said nothing. Daehyun waited patiently. He had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words. The Council is dying, Fenris said finally. The war has spread to 40 systems. The Vryn Consortium controls territory that once belonged to 7 different species. Millions are dead. Billions are displaced. And the Ravagers have returned. Daehyun felt a chill run through him. The Ravagers were mechanical horrors that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization 2 centuries ago. Humanity had fought alongside the Council to drive them back, had lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers in that war. The early warning systems are offline, Fenris continued, the ones humanity maintained. By the time we detected the Ravager fleet, they had already destroyed 3 colonies. We have no way to coordinate a defense. Our ships cannot communicate effectively across species. The command networks that humans built and maintained are gone. Then the Council must rebuild those systems, Daehyun said quietly. We have tried, Fenris said, and there was despair in his voice. We have been trying for 5 years, but we do not have the knowledge. The systems were too complex, too integrated. We can barely keep our own species' ships functioning, much less coordinate fleets from 200 different civilizations. He paused, then looked directly at Daehyun. Counselor Ventari sends her plea. She asks that humanity consider helping us, not because you owe us anything, you owe us nothing, but because billions of innocent beings will die if you do not. And what does the Council offer in return? Daehyun asked. What guarantees that we will not once again be betrayed when our usefulness has passed? Fenris reached into his robes and pulled out a data chip. Arbiter Thelnax was removed from power 2 years ago. He is awaiting trial for corruption and abuse of authority. The Council has acknowledged publicly that the accusations against humanity were false, that the evacuation was unjust. We offer a formal apology and an invitation to return. Daehyun took the chip but did not look at it. An apology is just words, Counselor. Words are easy. What else? What else? Fenris seemed confused. 5 years ago, the Council took 17 worlds from us, forced 30 million people from their homes. What does the Council offer to make that right? Fenris hesitated. The 17 sectors have been set aside as human territory, if you choose to reclaim them. Worthless rocks, Daehyun said flatly. The Vryn stripped them of anything valuable years ago. What else? I do not know what else you want, Fenris admitted. The Council has limited resources. The war has devastated our economy. We can offer you the rights to settle in Council space, trade agreements, access to our markets. All things we already have in our new alliance, Daehyun interrupted. We do not need the Council's permission to settle worlds or trade with other species. We left because the Council made it clear we were not valued. Now that you need us, you want us back. But you offer nothing except words and the privilege of cleaning up the mess you created. Fenris's blue skin seemed to pale further. Then, you will refuse? I cannot make that decision, Daehyun said. I told you I am retired. This choice belongs to the Human Assembly and to the leaders of our new coalition. He stood slowly, his joints aching. But I will carry your message to them, Counselor. I will tell them of the suffering and the desperate need for help. Thank you, Fenris said, and there were tears in his alien eyes. That is more than I dared hope for. 1 week later, the Human Assembly convened to debate Fenris's plea. The chamber was smaller than the Grand Council amphitheater, but it felt more alive, more real. Representatives of humanity and the dozen species who had joined their new alliance gathered to make a decision that would shape the future of the galaxy. Jiwoo stood to speak first. She was now a senior representative, her experience governing New Jeju having given her authority and respect. The Council drove us from our homes, she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. They took everything we built and threw it away like garbage. Now they come begging for help. My first instinct is to tell them to solve their own problems. Let them suffer as we suffered. There were murmurs of agreement throughout the chamber, but, Jiwoo continued, raising her hand for silence, my second thought is of the children. The innocent beings who had no part in the Council's decisions but will die if we do nothing. Can we really stand by and watch billions perish to punish the crimes of a few hundred leaders? Now there were murmurs of disagreement. The chamber was divided. Young Mi spoke next, her voice softer but no less powerful. I was a doctor on New Jeju. I treated anyone who needed help regardless of their species. That was the oath I took. To help those who suffer, not to judge whether they deserve that help. She paused, then continued. But I also remember the Council observers who watched us evacuate. They showed no sympathy. They expressed no regret. They were simply pleased that we were complying with their unjust orders. If we help the Council now, what lesson does that teach? That they can abuse us whenever convenient, knowing we will always come back when they need us? Admiral Taewan was the third to speak. His hair had gone gray, but his voice was still strong. From a strategic perspective, the question is simple. Do we benefit from the Council's survival or from its collapse? The chamber went very quiet. If the Council falls, the Ravagers will spread unchecked, Taewan continued. They will devastate hundreds of worlds. Eventually, they will reach our borders. We will have to fight them anyway, but without allies, without the combined resources of the galactic community. But if we save the Council, someone called out, we put ourselves under their authority again. We risk another betrayal. No, Taewon said firmly. If we help, we do so on our terms. We are not rejoining the Council. We are offering assistance as an independent power. The Council must accept our conditions or they will receive nothing. The debate continued for hours. Representatives argued passionately on both sides. Some wanted complete isolation, to build humanity's future without any connection to the species that had wronged them. Others argued for limited intervention, helping refugees and fighting the Ravagers without rejoining the Council's political structure. Finally, Dae-hyun asked to speak. The chamber fell silent. Though retired, he was still respected, still listened to. 5 years ago, I stood in the Council chamber and accepted their judgment, he said quietly. I did not argue. I did not threaten. I simply said we would comply. Do you know why? He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of dozens of representatives.